Came up because I talk about stereotypes all the time, and then I also make jokes about race, not necessarily Black people, because that'd be racist. But I make joke. Well, would it be racist if I make a joke about a Black person being white? It always depends on who I'm around.
That's the thing too. Like, there's all this talk about like cancel culture and like, what, a person can say and what a person can't say. And I'm on the fence about it because I believe that certain things, should be canceled. I believe there's certain things that are, not acceptable in regard to like what you're perpetuating and your intent and how you're trying to make people feel. Now, if you're aware that a joke is like, you have two different comedians, right? And two different comedians can say the same joke, but how one says it, where they present it, determines whether or not it's racist. Because for one thing that we don't talk about is like with cancel culture, we try to find absolutes for things, right? And what we're dealing with is the ambiguity of a lot of things and the determination of like, what's racist, what's sexist, what's bigoted, falling into the purview of like some narrow, undefined group of people that controls the conversation. And then they in turn get to cancel people. So to answer your question, that makes it so your joke, is it wrong to say it? If you're in front of a bunch of grandmas, Black grandmothers straight out of church, they may cancel you.
I don't do well with grandmas straight out of church anyway.
Exactly. And if I say, something anti-religious to, that same group of grandmas straight out of church, Brandon can get canceled too. So, but if I say it to a group of atheists, suddenly I'm the life of the party.
Right. I mean, so it's like there is that balance. It's going to always depend on who you're around. Like, of course, my intention with it. And for the most part, let me specify, because I didn't really tell a joke. I just said that I do joke about, stereotypes and races. Yeah. I can't tell one right now because for me, it's more that comes in the moment. So I'm like, but it's never usually disrespectful to a certain person. Or, because ultimately, or at least from what my understanding about cancel culture is, like, it's not going to fit. It can't be tailored to every single individual person. There's always going to be someone. Do I want to say always? There's very often going to be people that you cannot please and accommodate fully within a joke, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're targeting a certain person or thing. And then I guess with mine, like the fact that I joke about racial stereotypes, it's essentially more or less to break the stereotype. The reason that like we adhere to an already biased thing. And a lot of times they end up being white girl jokes, honestly.
I mean, I think, and that goes back like to, what some people are saying in regard to like, can you be racist against your own race? And yes, I believe you can. It comes down to, like I said, context and, there's context, there's content, and then, there's conviction. What do you believe whenever context?
I gotta write that down. Is that a thing? Does that come from somewhere?
That's ours now. I just came up with that. But anyway, content and conviction. So context is where are you saying it? Content is what are you saying? And conviction is like, what is your belief behind saying that? Why did you say that? Like, what was the meaning?
What was the motivating factor?
Exactly. So if I'm making, if for instance, Donald Trump, kung flu, thought he was a comedian, right? Context, he says it in the middle of a global pandemic, people dying all over the place. he's trying to pin the blame on China for starting this thing and his lackluster response to everything. He's trying to give everybody around him, because, a joke goes viral. If it's funny enough, it'll go viral, and, that will get out among a bunch of people, even people who don't watch the news. They're going to hear it. So he's trying to spread that blame around and give, his supporters an out. No, it's not me. And if you spread this funny joke around that blames it on the Chinese, we can all laugh about it and show, our unity. So there's a conviction, right? But he's not going to come around. He's not going to come out and say that overtly. That's how you know it's racism. Because if it's racism, you got to hide it. You got to mask it. You got to pretend that it's not what it really is. You're offended, but you're offended because you're a snowflake. You're offended, but you're offended because you don't know how to take a joke. You're offended because you're too politically correct. Now, if you saw like Andrew Dice Clay say some shit like that, back in the day, yeah, it would be racist, but we're talking about the 80s and the context of that time and people not being as aware. And so, yeah, are we going to retroactively fly back to, 1980 in our time machine and suddenly, cancel every comedian, Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, all these people who, said things that were, offensive in that moment? There's a lot of humor in racism and analyzing the construct and talking about, the absurdity of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that sometimes gets conflated with those individuals who are co-opting humor. And I can't say co-opting because it's funny to the audience that they're talking to. Like, whenever, Trump made his Kung Flu statement, it went wild because you have a lot of racists in the Republican Party who are more than happy to be comfortable spreading that lie around, and getting people, to high five them at the water cooler, at their blue collar job or whatever. It gave them a feeling of power, and entitlement. We can pick on this large group of people openly because our leader is allowing us to. That's it. That's humor for people who have that kind of mindset.
Yeah. So. It reminds, I have like so many thoughts, but with what you just said right there, it reminds me of a time where, I was working with a client, and she's Caucasian. Her husband is Caucasian and Asian. Yeah. White Asian. Like, just want to make sure I said, did I say Asian? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I made my joking, I'm a very dry, sarcastic, I guess I've learned the term upspeak recently, apparently. Mm-hmm. So my humor, I guess, comes within my tone and the way I deliver, and how I use my tone. Mm-hmm. So I made a joke about her being open-minded and suggestive to her husband being Asian. Like, clearly she's not, or like, I don't make the assumption that she is going to be racist, and she's married to someone who is of a different race than she is. Mm-hmm. And she took offense to that. I didn't know about it at the time. Mm-hmm. I could feel, like the energy in this. I guess people know who I am at this point, but I'm a therapist. So mm-hmm. I was working with her and in that therapeutic capacity. And, as a therapist, I like to bring humor. I think humor is healing as long as it is truly examined to be making sure that the conviction, as we were talking about earlier, is the motivating factor is truly something that promotes, kindness. If it's a joke about yourself, you're not going to make a joke that's going to be self-defeating and, energy wise, a slap in your own face, like that's self-deprecation. Yeah. And so in the session, I could feel like the energy was off, but I didn't pay any attention to it. And the next session is when she brought it to my attention that I can't remember exactly why she was offended. Of course, I respected it because everyone has their different, thresholds of what they find funny. She didn't mm-hmm. find that funny. Mm-hmm. And I just noted it for her for individually, but I guess in the grander scheme of things, for me, it just made me realize, like, okay, I do acknowledge like where she's at, and we talked about it. That's part of therapy, is like being able to address those uncomfortable discussions mm-hmm. in a space. Whereas, like, of course, I'm not going to judge her for being offended by it because she she said something. I'm glad she said something. It was a very teachable moment. But ultimately, in a grander scale, I had to make the choices like, am I really going to change my humor and stop making a suggestive joke like that just because one person got offended? And that's not something like, I'm not, some world-renowned comedian yet. But no, I don't think it's going that serious. But it's the examining like of the awareness of like, okay, is this going to be something that I'm going to restrict myself because one person has a personal experience that didn't find it funny, where everyone else is going to be restricted from what they can find funny and what is not a huge deal. So I say that, long story short, I say it to say is like, the insight, you have to make mistakes in order to build that insight. And when it comes to making jokes about race, as long as it's someone, if you're going to get offended by someone being offended, my radar is going to be like, all right, someone's got something to look at here. Like if you're getting defensive in any capacity, you got something to examine. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with you. I think that's one of the issues in regard to where we are in this moment right now. I think people have, true social change and social progress conflated with, don't make me uncomfortable. That's the vibe. That's what social change and social progress is for some people. Just don't make me uncomfortable. And that's not what we're talking about. I mean, social change, that makes social change and social progress very individual as opposed to social. Like your personal issues, are not what we cater to, because we recognize, your personal issues could be a result of a very, very bigoted and racist upbringing. So, if you don't want to talk about Black history in regard to this country because you don't like how it makes you feel, and that's, real social change, and that's why you want to pass laws and whatnot, then no, that's social change, but not in the positive direction. Your growth comes from discomfort and examining those things that make you uncomfortable. And so I think that's one of the issues in regard to cancel culture that, we also aren't discussing is the fact that we have to have that discomfort. We have to have the uncomfortable conversations if we're going to have the growth and make people accountable, for growth. Because in order to make people accountable, they have to talk. They have to agree to certain things. And an agreement only arises from a dialogue. And that dialogue is only going to happen if people, feel invested in the dialogue.
Yeah.
So humor helps to break that ice. It makes people feel like, hey, you know what? Like, this is not that bad. This is not that problematic. There's some nasty stuff that's associated with this, but we can, there's also some absurd stuff, that's associated with this, and we can have that dialogue. But then other people, are responding to trauma associated with this subject matter. And so as a joke, like I wouldn't make a rape joke to, I don't make rape jokes, period.
It tends not to be very tasteful.
Yeah.
Especially for men.
to a rape survivor. Like that
right.
But then casually, you might make we do have stuff in our vernacular that implies the same, and we don't really think about it in our day-to-day, interactions. Like, I went to my job and my boss just, fucked me with no lubrication, right? That's a rape joke. And you're laughing right now. But
no, I'm laughing because I may have, not without lubrication, but I may have used that term like last week in a joke.
Exactly.
Who knows me, but it was quite crude. It was quite, I was like, oh gosh, that was a lot even for me.
Exactly. And so we do that. And so we're thinking like, yeah, I would never say something that offensive. I would never. But the thing is, there's so much casual crudeness in our vocabulary that sometimes we don't recognize that we said that. And, somebody might pop up and say, yeah, last week I heard you say something about like your boss having sex with you against your will. And I just want you to know that my boss sexually assaulted me, and that, was hurtful to me. And so in that moment, like I said, context, content, conviction. In the context, you know, like you were there, you were hanging out, y'all were joking around, it was after party, you guys were just, you know, drinking beers, you know, and everybody was there. Content, you made this joke, you know, it was a joke, people laughed, you know, and then conviction, you didn't mean anything by it. Like, I mean, you didn't literally mean that you were sexually assaulted by your boss. You were just really talking about having a shitty day at work. And so I don't think at that point you intended to advance misogyny, you intended to advance rape culture, you intended to advance, and I mean, but some scholars may say just by talking about rape, you're advancing rape culture. Like, you know, just by speaking on the matter, you know, in a non-academic, you know, context. That? No, I'm saying there are some, that's what I'm trying to say. That's where the scale is so fluid. Like some people may say, okay, since you didn't have the proper conviction to be sexist, racist, you know, advancing rape culture. Some people may say that, but another group of people, and this is where it comes down to subjective interpretation, another group of people may look at that and say, just because you mentioned something about sexual assault, period, in a non-academic context, you are automatically in charge of advancing rape culture, and this person over here is right to be offended. And that's where, I mean, I think that's where we are. We've partitioned ourselves off in our social media bubbles and everything. So we've fine-tuned our sense of humor, our interpretation of the world around us in such a manner where, you know, to everybody that we associate with, we're funny as hell. You know, I recognize I have a very, very narrow market of people who enjoy, you know, gallows humor, and like, you know, I know Brandon ain't for everybody. I understand that. I get that. But there are some people who don't recognize that, and they step out of their bubble and they think they can continue to be, you know, Jessica on Instagram who tells everybody about themselves and gets 5,000 likes, and then go to the job and do the same thing and is like, why did I get fired? Like, why are you all so sensitive? Like, I got 5,000 upvotes saying this thing just last night. And so I think there's a lack of sensitivity in regard to that transition between your personal world, which seems to have grown because your bubble has grown exponentially. Everybody cheers for you, and then transitioning into the real world, where you have to coexist with other people. Now, if you're able to stand by your convictions in both worlds, that I feel is the universal truth. If I can say raping children is bad in my bubble, and then go out into the world and say the same thing and people co-sign that, I feel like that's a universal truth. It's matching your internal interpretation of the world. That's what reality is, right? It's matching your internal interpretation of the world with, you know, the world around you, and seeing how they align.
About like I think it was more in reference to the context of whether or not if you bring up anything and it's in an educated space versus non-educated space, you could be contributing to the overall like stigma, or what, I forget what exactly you said, or to the like the perpetuation of like sexual assault or rape. I smiled for a moment because it kind of loops in with what you said at the end there about it being your truth, is that like when you align yourself with the value, and for me as example, the value or a value within a guiding principle for you. So for myself, education is one of those guiding principles. I pursue that individually, you know, and I also consider what I do professionally. I educate people sometimes about themselves, but a lot of times just about what's going on underneath the surface of your body, because that's not something that everyone wants to go get educated on. And you essentially align and you align whether it's, you know, those two different masks that you have to wear in a professional and a personal setting, but you reduce the amount of like energy having to be used to consider what is actually going to be appropriate versus inappropriate. Like for the most things, like I'm not going to make an uneducated statement at this point. Well, I reduce the probability I'm going to make an uneducated statement.
Ever, Sarah, ever?
let me be a little bit more specific there. Because I value education, I'm going to take the time to make sure that if I'm going to make a point, I'm going to, you know, whether it's research backed or whether it's my own personal meaning to it, because it's something that's happened to me, that is now truly coming through in my life as education. So if I make a messed up joke, hey, guess what? I learned not to do it with that person, or I educated myself about that person to be more mindful of, like, I don't have to, like, you know, block them or like get away from them because they took a joke like the wrong way. I just have to note that, like, oh, I learned that this person is not in the place where they feel comfortable getting and talking about race in that capacity. And ultimately, and that was a couple years ago, and me and this client, we now have very open conversations about how they can get involved with social justice conversations within her family. And because she is a Caucasian female in an Asian American family now. So
and I mean, I agree with you. I mean, what you're talking about there is interpersonal growth, right? So I think what we often forget about this as we're navigating these tricky waters is it's not about finding absolute rules. It's about finding out a way to have, you know, a healthy dialogue. And so part of this isn't about, you know, isn't about what to say, isn't just about what to say and what not to say. It's about communicating to the other person that I care about you and your perspective. And so what a person is saying to you when they're saying, you know, that's uncomfortable, that's racist, there's the overt explicit statement that's being said in that they are saying, you know, something that you said offends me on a racial level, right? There's that overt saying, okay? But the implied saying is, you know, you hurt me, and I want to see if my communication of that pain reflected, you know, as a result of your actions is going to be addressed, right? So that's what your client said to you, you know, in that meeting, you know, because the other thing that's being said is, I want this relationship to continue, right? Like there are some people, there are some diehard racists I know online, some diehard racists I've encountered in real life, where I know, like, especially if they're on a platform where they're trying to grow their following, trying to grow their support, like, you're not going to walk into a Klan rally where, you know, some 20-year-old neo-fascist is, like, you know, telling everybody why he should be in charge and convince him, you know, to suddenly see the light and find, you know, some multicultural Jesus. That's not going to happen. So yeah, I mean, you have to understand whether or not, I know if I have that conversation with that individual, they don't care about how I feel. So I'm not even going to try to have the discussion. Your client came to you because they expected you to care about how they felt, and they wanted to continue to have dialogue, you know, because there are some people, you got one time to say something racist, you know, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to interact with you anymore. You know, I'm going to go and tell everybody else you racist, and we good. You know, so, but I'm very, very careful before I make a statement about somebody being racist, involuntarily so. And that's another thing too. It's a transitive state of being. I feel like, and that's what makes me go so hard against it, because when I go hard against somebody about being racist, I'm saying you can do better. Like, you know, like, if we apply logic, facts, and reason to this situation, you can do better. You're choosing not to. Now let's get to the bottom of why you're choosing not to. But if, as we're getting to the bottom of that, you continue to advance your racist agenda, I'm going to come just as hard at you, because you can do better. Like, you either believe in free will or you don't, right?
Yeah.
So I think we need that's one thing we have to, I mean, that's one thing we have to acknowledge. That's one thing we have to consider is, you know, yeah, there is, I mean, there's free will. We all have a choice in regard to, like, how we want to approach one another and how we want to be interpreted and how we want to make, you know, others feel. And if I'm going up against somebody that I know I've communicated my pain toward, and in regard to their actions, and they say, oh, Brandon, I didn't know that. Like, you know, I grew up around blah, blah, blah. We always used to say, my grandpa used to say this, I'm sorry, I was offended, my bad. You know, I won't do that again. You know, then I can log that. But then if I catch you behind the water cooler doing the same thing again, you were just doing that for show to my face.
Right. Like, once you know better, you can do better. And you're not supposed to do better like first, like if you make a mistake, correct it. Whether, because I mean, it's change is hard. Once, if you really grew up, if that's a pattern in your behavior, changing that pattern is not just going to happen. That's the behavior, you know, analyst in me coming out there, is that it's all interconnected with everything else that your identity includes. And so just being able to change your, I mean, I would hope, taking like an offensive word that we've, I think for the most part, the N word has been something I've even known when I didn't have these conversations as a derogatory term towards a certain race of and group of people. And so removing that, I would hope, is not going to be difficult. But if you said it consistently and throughout your vocabulary, I mean, that'd be like asking, well, I don't think really you say that, the N word like that, do you?
No, I don't at all. I mean, and that's a choice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a choice of my own intentionally, because I recognize that there's too much volatility and too much interpretation behind it, that can be misconstrued, you know, given the situation. I could say it affectionately to one group of people or whatever, and then because I flow between crowds, other people will be like, Brandon said it over here, why can Brandon say it here and he's not? And then I can't say I agree with the construct. Then I have to say, well, I can say it because I'm Black. I can't say I disagree with the construct of race and what race is and what it's done to our species, and at the same time, you know, advance this notion that I have certain privileges, you know, to hurt people.
But my point being, so let's just say that you didn't have all those like intertwining, you know, communities that you have to navigate, and that would, and you said the N word as more of a like just freedom of speech at that point, right? And it's a word that I think the Black community has taken and formed power for them, and it not being power.
Some have. That's how don't we talk about it? Because there's a bunch of people. I mean, if you talk to the Black bourgeois, you know, those middle and upper class Black people, if they say it behind closed doors after, you know, a couple, you know, shots of Hennessy or whatever, about what they encountered at the workplace. But, you know, they aren't going to say it in public, you know, so it's like they recognize the power of individuals who, that's the other thing about the word. These individuals know it has power, and they flex it. What's your conviction behind it?
Right.
Why are you saying
before you, because that's a whole tangent, but I want to say this is like, that's me asking you, if you use that word normally in your vocabulary, to remove it from your vocabulary. It's not just going to be that easy. And but once you know better, of like, okay, this ultimately, and it sounds like knowing better is really having to make the choice that you want to, you know, you want to align with fueling the greater good of like, not stigmatizing words, but like also it feeds into just the overall promotion of racial fairness and balance within. So because you're just automatically going to be in a discussion about like, well, why can a Black person use it versus not a white person, and there's so many, anyways.
I mean, that's another main reason why I don't use it, because it derails discourse. Like, you know, I mean, that's one of those conversations that is going to go on infinitely, and it enrages me, in fact, because of the fact that like it kills if we count up the hours globally that have been dedicated to that word and that word alone, think of all of the other shit that we could have accomplished as a species if we had just been like, you know what, like we're not using that word. Like no one else is using that word. Like you don't see Jewish people calling themselves, you know, these slurs. You don't see Asian people calling themselves these slurs. And you've seen some people try to be more provocative and do the same thing. You know, I've heard of, you know, people from the Latin American community, like, you try to use some of the slurs that were assigned to them, it just doesn't even sound right. It doesn't roll off. And like you're trying to, it's almost like Mean Girls, where like you're trying to make this slur happen. It's
you're
not
trying
to
make it a thing.
Yeah, it's not going to be a thing. You're never going to be as big as the N-word. It's never going to be as big as the N-word.
No.
Like there is no, even whenever you reference, the derogatory terms in your culture, you're like, it's the N-word of insert culture here. It's the N-word of, and so like, you're not going to get more notorious than the N-word. You're just not. So don't even try. We don't even like the N-word, and we're trying to get people to stop using it. So yeah, I mean,
which leads me to a question I just kind of had as a passing thought, but since we were talking about cancel culture, it's like, is it wise to try to cancel the N-word?
It's not possible. That's the thing too. At the end of the day, nothing can be canceled. Like, I mean, it's literally in the laws of physics. Like, matter cannot be created or destroyed. So once an idea is out there, now you can talk about the popularity of said idea. I don't worship Zeus anymore, but there's somebody.
But it's not that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, somebody in Greece, maybe some, person in some kind of, mental health institution in Greece might be like, you know what? I'm taking it back to the old gods, like the old gods, like, Hercules, Mount Olympus. That's where I'm going. So the idea is there. Like it still lives somewhere in someone. It's obscure as fuck, but it's still, there in someone. So you can't cancel an idea. You can cancel how popular it might be by trying to change public opinion, but just by saying, I'm canceling the N-word. If you can't, if the N-word can't be canceled, if a word that we made up in the English language to denigrate a group of individuals cannot be eliminated from thought, from history, you can't. It's nothing. Now you can make a choice individually moving forward that I'm not going to use this word anymore, just like individuals said, you know what? I'm not rocking with Zeus anymore.
Eat healthier food.
Exactly.
Everybody else has to eat healthier food, but you get to choose.
But over time, we choose. I mean, we make better choices, or we make different choices, better or worse, and things ebb and flow out of the lexicon of human communication. Like that's what happens. It's happened over. We don't. There's stuff that we don't. Does anybody still? And no one does the Cabbage Patch or the Running Man. Whenever they go out dancing and stuff,
let it go.
No one's exactly. There was no discussion. Like
let it move on.
Yeah,
without us.
Yeah. Somewhere in the 90s, someone was like, "Yo, like that looks stupid now." Like it was hot like 5 years ago, but stop doing it now. But then every so often you'll see, because I was watching Legendary about on HBO. It's about ballroom culture. It's like a contemporary a reality show competition about ballroom culture. And one of the
like ballroom dancing.
No. The Paris is Burning, like drag show culture, like that. Like ballroom. I've seen ballroom dancing documentaries too. Not that movie, but yeah. So in one of the competitions, because they have these themed competitions, in one of the competitions, they were examining hip hop. And so, yeah, like, as, these contestants were competing in like, these extravagant, costumes and outfits and whatnot for this particular competition, they were simulating, hip hop through the years. And so then you see the Running Man pop back up, as these contestants are doing it. And you're like, oh, I remember that. That's hot or whatever. But if you saw your Uncle Larry doing that at, the family reunion, half drunk, you'd be like, oh, he's crazy. He crazy. Like no one does that anymore. So yeah, I mean, ideas don't go away. You can't cancel anything. They just ebb and flow and move into different contexts and change and evolve. Like, I mean, we can talk about hip hop culture itself. Like, it started off with people canceling the music that was played the way that it was, jazz albums and whatnot. And then, taking 2 turntables and now you're scratching the jazz album. So I've canceled what the jazz was before, and I've turned it into something else. And now I got, my boy over here rapping on top of it, and now we've created something else. So did jazz end? No, it didn't end. Did people stop listening to jazz? No. But now jazz gave birth to this new thing. And it's evolved to include, like, you got country artists, inserting rap into their songs. You got rock bleeding into rap, like genres, much like race, have become really twisted. Is Rihanna rock? Is she pop? It depends on how she's singing and who she's singing to and who she's singing with.
Right. So ultimately, I was just thinking there too, it's because you were saying, like, you can't cancel anything. I agree with you. I mean, it's going to be too much of a consequence at this point especially to try to get people to resist doing something that some people just don't quite understand. That's part of why we're here. They don't understand why, not acknowledging Black Lives Matter is racist, and why it goes into such, an extreme category. So, but when you resist people and tell people, like, okay, we're canceling this, it's natural human behavior to deviate, like, and to not want, like, no, you can't tell me what to do, and that reject that instruction. So I call it the Chinese finger trap. I don't necessarily mean that as a race thing, but like the literal, little toy that you get at like the Dollar Tree when you're a kid, your fingers get stuck in it. The more that you resist,
you pull it too hard,
you get stuck in it. And then the other term that I use with mental health stuff, but is, object permanence is a developmental term for children that is, like, at a certain, I think it's like 1 to 6 months. Please do not quote me on that, but ultimately kids cannot see something. That's why peekaboo is so effective for babies, because if you can't see your face, you don't exist to them. But I call it adult object permanence, is that when we get so focused on one thing, so like cancel culture, it's like it's tunnel vision. And so, like, if you can't see it happen, or if you don't experience it, doesn't make sense to you as to why it exists.
But then that's where, as a communications instructor, this is where I need you to understand that cancel culture did not come from the left. That's the authoritarian lie. Cancel culture. There was no one on the left who was like, you know what, we're going to start doing it. We're going to start this campaign, and we're going to call it cancel culture. That's what we're doing. And and everything that we don't like, we're going to say that's what we're all going to collectively do this thing. The concept of canceling may have come from, some individuals, period, who were like, you know what, we're going to make this decision about this particular type of behavior. But it wasn't about leftist. It wasn't about, like, a political ideology. We're talking about, there's certain things like, racism that needs to be ended. Like, this is something that needs to go. Turning it into a buzzword came from those same people who locked into exactly what you just stated. If I say I can use this to protect my property or what I want to stick around by saying it's a target of this thing. So I create the boogeyman, and then I tell you who the boogeyman is going after. And so then you run over there. You know what? They're trying to cancel, history. So run down there and protect that statue, right? They're trying to cancel masculinity. So you need to come out to this rally where, we counter all these women in, their pink pussy hats and whatnot. So if you see it more often than not, you see it drop. Initially you saw it drop by the right. And then now it's like, now it's everybody. Now we don't know where it came from and how it originated and who did it first. And it's just the problem that we all need to deal with. And it's bad. And because it's bad, wherever we hear the buzzword, whatever it's applied to, we need to look at that. And so now it becomes this other thing, like the N-word, where we're just spending all this time talking about it as opposed to actually doing anything.
Right. Then becomes like the trigger for people.
Yeah. So now we're all just
away.
Now we're all
and we can't talk about like a color being without having some association to race, and it's like, oh, that's now racist.
Exactly. You know what? How are your crayons labeled in your box? We don't use the word, white anymore because that's, considered offensive. Now, pass me the alabaster crayon. And if you say pass,
but if we were to call it blanco, then that's
not,
like,
exactly. Now you're just being racist in another language,
right?
Like, so yeah, I mean, that's the absurdity where you parse it down to the point of immobility, where we can't move forward at all. I can't say anything. You can't say anything. And then these individuals who wanted this divisiveness have won. No one wants to talk anymore. Now you're upset because you can't say anything and you feel like everybody's too sensitive. So you're going to go and join this, this extreme right-wing coalition that's punching back against all this stuff that pissed you off. Boom, they've won. That's like I said, communications instructor. They have branded righteous outrage. So
I have short story, and I want just to hear your feedback, not necessarily whether or not it's racist, because if it is, I'll hear that, but whether or not this kind of speaks to what you're talking about. So I sold my house recently and I had multiple offers, and the two offers that I was considering, I chose the one for, not the whole thing was a racial thing, but I chose an offer from a single white woman versus a single mother Hispanic with 2 kids, I think. Mm-hmm. Just in that it was a kind of a stereotype. I was going off last name, but I just know that it was a single mother with 2 kids trying to buy my house. Mm-hmm. And considering the market was hot right now, I was like, okay, if by some reason like this person, like the house something goes wrong, due diligence that they offered, I was like, I would feel I can't sleep at night knowing that I took, over $5,000 from a single mother with 2 children for someone who I want to give her the house, but I ended up choosing the other offer one because it was a young white woman who I felt was like, okay, if I'd rather take money from her, that's a little, there's that part, but also it was a higher offer. And in the end, it was, just a better offer all the way around. But when I brought that and I said that to someone who is more conservative, they're like, why does it have to be about race? Like, that's just like, you brought race into it. And I was like, well, I mean, that was just the way that I was thinking. Like, there was multiple aspects. Yeah, I mean,
you were making a sale, it was your property, and if you wanted to consider the demographics of your area as you were making your decision, like whenever you're buying something, you're making a decision about who you're buying from, and whenever you're selling something, you're making a decision about who you're going to sell to. And so, that was your individual choice. I mean, if you had you didn't have to give her an explanation, in regard to that. For her to say, why is it always making it about race? You were like, because to me, that was an important factor behind its decision. At the end, money won out because I needed the money. But it still was important to me because of the area I'm in. And I wanted to give, some other people an opportunity in my area, a foothold, if you will, in my area where they could, have access to the American dream. I feel like there's a disparity in regard to how many people have access to land in this country. And so that was my way of trying to push back. That would have been my response to see what she was saying, because it sounded more like she was offended because she feels like race shouldn't be considered in anything. And there are some people who think like that. But the thing is, if we have this construct of race, I have to adhere to it if we're filling out a census and we're determining where, hospitals and schools and how zoning is going to be, if it factors into my life, then yeah, we're going to have conversations about it. If you're making it that way.
Yeah, and there was so many other considerations, because I specifically, the race was one, but my neighbors were another consideration to that. I was like, True. I live next to an older couple. I think a single person versus a single mother with 2 kids are probably going to be something that, but financially, that was the only reason. Shoot, I'm saying in a family member's house is to, gain something from it. I don't just go live with my mom every day, so there was multiple considerations to that, but the race one was one that was picked out, and this person is more conservative, and I know who they voted for, but I still like, I just saw it for what it was, and I was like, okay, we'll address this another time, because there was just a reaction to the fact that it happened. And that is, I guess that's my way of trying, like, I do find a connection to what you were saying, is like, cancel culture, it's one of those, I don't want to say, is it a facade? A mirage, right? It's like, it looks like, oh, it's doing good, but like, canceling everything is going to bring imbalance to the systems that we do have that are actually helpful, and we have to talk about these things.
But I'm with you, but I also subscribe to the belief that which can be destroyed by truth, needs to be destroyed by truth. And so throughout, like I said, throughout history, we've had that imbalance happen over and over again. I think we've become uncomfortable with societal growth. Like, at some point, there had to be cancel culture that was applied to the Greek pantheon, or like I said, we would all still be, worshiping Zeus, waiting for Helios to carry the sun across the sky on a chariot. But at some point, we had to sit down and say, you know what?
That's not going to happen.
I mean, it apparently happens daily from what I've heard, but at some point we had to sit down and acknowledge the fact that there's science, there are facts, that conflict with our beliefs. And yes, it rocks the foundation of what we do to our core. I need to take down my Helios shrine. I paid 5,000 drachmas for somebody to build in my house last week, because now I look like an idiot. But it's worth it for me not to look like an idiot. But there are some people who are like, I paid 5,000 drachmas for this, so we're worshiping Helios until I die. Like, that's how it's going to be.
Yeah, the concept of, well, we've said this before, but I'll continue to say it, is that having to lose something that you've either worked for or received, but whether it's money, identity, or to make room for the consideration, like, oh, maybe it will come back to you in some other way. It's very difficult for people. Very difficult. I'm gonna say it's difficult for me too. I don't like to give up anything. Well, and acknowledge that I messed up, or I was wrong, or I was incorrect.
And that's where my personal belief system and pantheism comes into play. And I acknowledge, yes, like, what are you giving up? Like, what are you giving up? What do you own? What do you have? Right. Whenever you die, what goes with you? Like, we talk about this all the time. Can't take it with you. It's not YOLO. That. Exactly. Except when it comes to these things that, we've internalized as part of our identity, and
the things that we can't see, and they're not always tangible. Like what is, like, you can't do anything. I can't do anything about this other than sit out in the sun and like get burnt and give myself skin cancer.
Exactly.
So but I hold on to it as anyways.
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, at the end of the day, this becomes a symbol. Like, it becomes a symbol of, it becomes it becomes a uniform, if you will, for the team that you play for, And so, just like you got the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers, and everybody's got their silver and their blue on, and their yellow and their gold, yellow and green, like, and we just got to go at it, because this is what you were born in Green Bay, Wisconsin. This is the team you support. You have no choice. You're born in Dallas, Texas. This is the team you support. You have no choice. Don't ever at any Super Bowl go to the other side of the stadium, talk with those people. That is the enemy from this point forward. And the problem is, it's not even the fact that you have anything invested in this jersey. You didn't make this jersey. You didn't give this jersey to yourself. They just gave this jersey to you and told you you're supposed to wear it. It's the fact that there's individuals who own both of these dynasties who need y'all to continue coming to these damn games. So every year we got to have a new crop of Dallas Cowboy fans. So that's why we got to buy these jerseys, these little gateway, drug uniforms, get your kid sitting down with you, watching the game.
I want to speak to that so bad with my addictions background.
So we can bring you in and you're associating all the good times with that Dallas Cowboy symbol and that star. And so whenever you grow up, it's like, yeah, you know, I've always been a Cowboy. No, you weren't. You were made. Just like in Green Bay, somebody's daughter is being indoctrinated with the same thing and associating all the possible family events and everything that went down and how crazy Uncle Larry, you know, jumped off a chair whenever Green Bay scored that touchdown against the Cowboys in 2018, whatever. And so they've associated all these positive feelings with their jersey. Mm-hmm. So we do that with race. You come from a religious family, they do that with religion, you know.
I mean, it did happen to me with sports, but I remember I was always a Duke fan. Yeah, my mom went to Duke, and so it's like I was raised. So whenever I was growing up in a place that wasn't abundant with Duke people, nothing was ever said. When I came down here, I had to learn very quickly, oh, like, this is a conviction. Mm-hmm. You are either Duke or Carolina, and there is no, and I had to choose. Like, as I've evolved, you know, I do believe in taking side. I am going to root for Duke by all means, but I was like, do I have to be the Duke fan that tears down UNC? No, mm-hmm. It's just when they're playing together, you know, like then the shit starts, flying out of my mouth. But you know, if they're now like, okay, Roy Williams is a great coach, mm-hmm. and most UNC teams, when they're like all working together, they are an epic team, mm-hmm. but Duke's better.
I am employed at Duke. I have friends at UNC, but I don't really watch sports like that. People ask, like, you know, so you really love Duke basketball. Like, I don't even watch sports like that. Like, I'm from, I mean, if anything, Roy Williams actually used to coach at KU before he came to UNC. So that's how I knew about him before I came out here. So, mm-hmm. you know, my loyalty was going to be like, well, you know, maybe I should go to, you know, UNC if I got to choose a side in this thing. But then I was like, you know, this is stupid. Like, I thought that means I have to follow these people and know what's going on so I can participate in arguments about people I don't know who don't fucking cut me a check any kind of way. I'm not getting drafted. I'm just promoting this shit for why? No, I'm not. I'm not.
And then there's where you haven't had that background to being, you know, once you're actually immersed in the culture, you don't have that connection to it, where I do, but I ended up making that choice. So I was like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna like bash UNC outside of the time where they're up, you know, against, and tell them like they're not good. Yeah. And disrespect, just because I am a, you know, a product of my own upbringing with, my mom doesn't like talk that, but she'd be like, oh, they're a UNC fan. And I'm like, whatever.
I mean, the funny thing about that culture is, as extreme as it can be, as most, like, you know, college obsessed cultures are, you know, Notre Dame, you know, the Razorbacks, you know, Gamecocks, like, you know, you got Florida Gators, like, you have all these people, all these different cultures that exist that are designed to engender loyalty. So, you know, when Sarah Wilder has a child, you know, she brings them into the fold, and she'll be damned if they go to a UNC class ever. Duke is where you belong. With all of that,
it would be East Carolina University, but I didn't even sign up for them because I was always a Duke fan.
True, I forgot you are a Pirate grad.
I'm a Pirate.
So with that being the case, like, even with that, like, that's real. Like, I mean, these cultures are real. They're real people assigned to real institutions. And we can talk about, you know, the reality of what you get back from your devotion to these things. But the fact is, at the end of the day, they're real. UNC exists. I've been on that campus. Duke, I work on that campus. East Carolina, been on that campus. But whenever you try, the problem with dealing with race is race was never real. And that's the biggest problem that we face and we deal with as we're manipulating our beliefs within this system, you know, because at the end of the day, you know, whenever you're talking about race, it goes back to the very beginning of this conversation. You're talking about generalizations being made about individuals. Somebody can have your same skin complexion all day long, but they were adopted into a Black family. They've listened to Michael Jackson, the OJs, the Platters, you know, they know how to do the electric slide when it comes on better than anybody else. So they prefer soul food, over going to the Cracker Barrel anytime. And so it's like, if not for the amount of melanin in their skin, you would totally accept this person as being Black. But because they don't look the part, they can't play with us over here because, that's one of them white boys. Like, that doesn't make sense. Where, if you go to Duke or you work for Duke, you're part of the Duke community. You're part of the Duke culture. That's real. It's defined.
It's a culture, trust me. I work right off campus. Exactly. I'm not part of the culture, but I get people part of the culture to process.
Exactly. So I pay. So I mean, yeah. So they pay. I get a check from them. It's a thing. You graduated from there. It's a thing. That literally happened. The thing is, we took this thing that wasn't real, and we can say same thing about sports. We took this thing, that wasn't real, race, and then we started to infuse it with, suffering and blood and violence and subjugation and inequality. And so you tack on trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma, and then all the trauma ends up making this thing a reality for people.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you talk about choice. You talked about choice earlier, and I do believe there is a choice to learn more about the things that you do react to. But from a mental health perspective, I will say choice after that much trauma, after that much association and vicarious trauma. Like, so I don't care if you were born, in slavery, or if like any of your, the generational, family members that you've had, you pick up people's trauma out of behavioral manifestations of that trauma throughout generations. And after trauma, choice becomes very difficult at that point. Yeah. Because you have that, it ties to your central nervous system, it ties to your spiritual value, it ties to your whole worldview. Like, you may not even realize that you don't have a choice in being something than what you're not. And in this case, being racist. I'm not going to take away from the fact that you always do have a choice to learn differently. Yeah. At this day and age, with as much access to information that we have, there is a choice that's clear. Yeah. But I just wanted to give both sides. It's like, it is very difficult to recognize that the way that you see the world is not always helpful to to you, first and foremost, because it does cause and correlates with a lot of mental health, problems that we have as a society, but also for the greater good, it doesn't help the greater good. I'm not asking you to value the greater good. I would hope you would want to, because karma right there, but that's also my belief system. And, but yeah, it's just, choice is, I will say an extreme word, you can never say never. Yeah. Never, because anything is possible, and you may be in denial and didn't even realize it.
Well, yeah, we all could be too. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we argue, about choice, but then we also talk about, things that are inevitable. Like, there's some people who grew up in extremely racist environments, and that's all they knew. That's all they were taught. And so now, you get dropped into the real world. You go off to college for the first time, and everybody's calling you a racist, and you're like, well, I've always talked like this. I always thought this was okay. I always thought this was, acceptable. And yeah, but then, like you say too, we all have the choice as to what we expose ourselves to, online. At least that's what we believe. But then what we gravitate to, that is not based off of choice necessarily. If I was raised about racist, then I'm probably going to gravitate toward people who are more racist because I feel more comfortable around them. I can be myself around them. I can talk around them or whatever. So, do racists create racism, or does racism create the racist? Because you have the racist culture that existed, before you, that you were born into. And it becomes a what came first, the chicken or the egg type situation. So we all could be deluding ourselves and thinking we all have a choice, and this is all just one big running simulation.
But you know what? I want to remind, because I that question ultimately it's inevitable with everything that we do in this present day. At least that's, how I see it. It's like in mental health, I can't tell you what came first. The genetic variable that may or may not be completely linked to your mental instability, or the behavioral and the trauma that you've experienced that alters your genetic makeup from like trauma that's passed down generationally. Can't tell you that, and we're working towards it, but at the end of the day, we're always going to be at a crossroads of like what caused it. And I love an answer. I love a good solid 1 + 1 = 2. But there's always we have to sit with the fact that like we got to do something, regardless of figuring out where we know like where it came from or who has to be right versus wrong. We gotta freaking do something, because the fact is we know that it's a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the main thing that we're wrestling with right now. And I've had this conversation over the past couple of weeks. I think we're starting to deal with what I'm calling emotional empathy exhaustion. Because there's so many things that are going on in regard to racial injustice. Like, I mean, just this week, another tape that came out, I think it was like Louisiana, that was actually being held by the Louisiana police for 2 years. They lied about this guy, being killed in a car chase, and then it was released and released to the public against the will of the Louisiana police force. And it showed basically like, this guy was dragged out of his car. Now, given he was, evading arrest or whatever, but he said that he was scared, and you hear him talking about it, as he's on the ground and pinned down, saying that he was scared. He didn't know what was going to happen to him. He thought he was going to die, this, that, and the third or whatever. And he actually did die. And he didn't die in the car accident. He died from, he died on the way to the hospital from injuries sustained as he was being repeatedly tased, beaten, kicked, and whatnot, on the ground during this arrest. So yeah, I mean, you have more and more of these situations that pop up, and it's like, how many shirts can we make, and then you have, everybody wanting to get back to normal and, go out and be around friends again, and, do I get the vaccine? Do I not get the vaccine? You got people who are still getting sick and people who are still dying. And so it's like, there's a point, I feel, where the bandwidth for any particular human is limited. And
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's like we're getting that empathy exhaustion, and we've got to be able to determine where we allocate our mental resources. And so part of that determination, to circle back to what you were saying, comes from evaluating and determining what a problem is. And if you and I can't agree that something is a problem, because you have your own set of facts and you have your own reality, and then I have my own set of facts and I have my own reality, then, regardless of whoever is right based off of the reality at hand, nothing's going to get done, because the other party is going to disagree with any action being taken. And so now you have a point where discussion, I don't feel, with individuals who are set in their convictions is beneficial. Like, I don't think that, Democrats need to be negotiating with Republicans, in the White House, or not in the White House, but in Congress, when it's obvious, and they've stated repeatedly, we have no intention of working with you. Like, that's it. We're good. We feel like this election was stolen, and we're going to do everything to get it back in 2022. So we're going to obstruct you at every turn. And whatever you present, we're shooting down, just like they did with Obama. So at that point, like, yeah, once you recognize you're dealing with somebody who's not going to work with you, who's not going to talk with you, who's not going to help or whatever, then it's just about brute force in regard to getting your convictions across. And I think that's where we are right now, where you have one group of individuals who they already knew that their position was diminished, who felt like on January 6th, they needed to use brute force to get their beliefs across, because they couldn't get it with the popular opinion, which was represented by the popular vote. So we got to pretend like that didn't even happen. That wasn't true. More people would have stood up, if they had the opportunity to help fight back or whatever. All these lies are being spread about, what people want to believe.
Yeah, I mean, well, the chatter just incites, redirection of everyone's focus, and at that point, that's just going to exhaust people, in addition to already being exhausted from what, when you said empathy exhaustion. I mean, I love the term, partly because I deal with most of it myself every day, but
I'm gonna need residuals. So y'all see right now, a lot of stuff that I'm saying, it's gonna pop up in a book somewhere, and I need.
Oh, it's already in books. Like, I'm sorry, as wise as you are, not every there's very little information that is truly original these days.
I'm genius, and everything I say is new. Go ahead.
Yes, it's Brandon's world, and we're all living in it. Mm-hmm. So the concept of how I run into this, not only for me personally, I mean, as a therapist, my role is directly, I mean, first and foremost, if you ain't got no empathy, you're not going to be a pretty productive therapist, right? Mm-hmm. But I have a conversation with my clients often about the difference between empathy and sympathy, and the concept of being an empath. So I understand that all these terms relate to us, that we need to be open and supportive to people, and we have to give our attention to these people who are suffering. Absolutely true. But the difference, I think a lot of people, maybe you realize, maybe you don't, but for just to be sure, sympathy is when you take on. I had to look up the definition just to make sure that I was.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do it, because sometimes I've used them interchangeably. I know that's wrong, but go ahead.
Yeah, and in terms of how you remain in full control and of your choices, this is crucial in a mental health perspective, is because sympathy, so by definition, is an affinity or an association or relationship between persons or things wherein whatever affects one similar, you know what I'm trying to say, affects the other. Mm-hmm. So in visual, how I make, you take on the emotion of someone else in order to be sympathetic, right?
Okay.
Empathy is the understanding of one's suffering or one's point of view, perspective, however. Now, I didn't look up the definition. Let me do it real quick.
So sympathy is, I am imagining what you are going through, and I feel your pain as a result of imagining what you're going through. Sympathy
Brandon, I feel you right now.
I feel your pain. Empathy is I connect with you because I have experienced something similar. Gotcha.
Yeah. Gotcha. So empathy, by definition, let me make sure I read Merriam-Webster here, are closely hold on, that's not the definition. My bad.
So it's one thing. I sympathize with someone if I'm giving someone my sympathies if I say, I'm sorry about the loss of your goldfish, because I've never had a goldfish, but I've lost a pet, and so I sympathize. I know,
I feel grief for you.
But empathy is, I know what it's like to lose a goldfish. I know exactly what you're going through, because my goldfish died last week, just like your goldfish just died today. And so, okay.
It's like, so you have that connection on your own accord,
yeah.
But it's also limited to the understanding. Okay. Mm-hmm. Definition of empathy: the ability to identify with or understand another's situation or feelings, and attribute an attribution of one's own feeling to an object. So it's an extension of your understanding, your feeling, to make sense of how this other person and what their suffering is like. And why I said that earlier is it has a limit to it, is because what I would encourage people to consider as an unhealthy is that if you let that emotion consume you to the point it triggers you to be sympathetic, because now you've fully taken on that other person's emotion, because their situation has now has affected yours. That's a you problem. If you don't have that boundary to know, what, Brandon, I really have an understanding about what you're going through because your goldfish died. And if goldfish, my association knocks me off for the rest of the day, that's something I need to look at. But that now becomes sympathy, because I have taken your emotion or my emotion and extended it to you came back and it overran me. And that's where I see a lot of people burn out, and that empathy exhaustion, as you described, becomes unhealthy for the long term, because you are now triggered by a situation that wasn't even yours. You have an understanding of it, but that understanding also needs to be, and we have to learn how to cope with how to make sure that exhaustion does not continue to happen. Does that make sense?
But that's the thing too, is like I think we're working in reverse.
Yes,
you
we're
know,
working out of
where it's almost like a victim blaming thing going on, and I think you stumbled upon something that is quite profound, to be honest, because I feel like there's a lot of people from these traumatized communities who want people to feel that trauma, because for instance, we talk about Black people, it's like, we've been telling you that, rape and killing and murdering, people that you've labeled Black, for over 400 years is not cool, is not acceptable. Maybe if you felt some of this pain some way, somehow, just a little bit of it, let me share this with you in this song, Strange Fruit. And you can hear Billie Holiday sing about it, and you just get uncomfortable by the visuals. That will compel you to actually change stuff, because you've been talking about you have sympathy for us for years. You've been talking about you even have empathy for us for years, but there's no meaningful change that's happened. This stuff is still occurring.
And it's easier to now well, I can't do not easier in like a morale way, but when we take on too much emotion, that's first of all, if it's not a choice at that point to be like, look, I need to draw my limit because I'm too overwhelmed by feeling right now. Or if it's the brain's defense mechanism that will naturally redirect and compartmentalize you from not even exposing something that makes you that uncomfortable anymore. It's like some of it you don't have control over, because your body might take over depending on how already anxious or overwhelmed or emotionally unwell you are. You won't. It's a defense mechanism. And so I was gonna say that to say I lost my train of thought.
No, I mean, but what you're talking about plays out in the workplace, where you have people who are all like, and then also, in the classroom, it's like, I don't want my child to feel uncomfortable about race the way that I feel comfortable about race. So I don't want to discuss slavery. I don't want to feel uncomfortable in my job, in my workplace, talking about the history of race and, disparity in regard to power structures, because, I'm trying to, rise through the ranks around here. And I feel like my race is going to be held against me, as I do so now, because we're talking about this. Go ahead.
I know where I was going with that. And what you said kind of sparked my memory, because when you brought up strange fruit, I learned about strange fruit, I think, in my little New England town, probably in high school. I think we had one Black teacher in the whole school. I mean, very small, predominantly white community. And I had such a different connection to that song back then, to the point where I was first of all, we're young teenagers, we do this all the time. We want to feel for other people. That's why this generation is doing so well with change, but it's overwhelming. So for me, how I dealt with, my history, the fact that I didn't have a lot of exposure to Black people and Black history just in general, but it didn't connect to the point but it also connected almost so much, because I never talked about it or really thought about it much after that. Like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with the song. But you flash forward to, and then I went through this phase in my life where I was so overstimulated by other people's stuff that I just locked it away, and I couldn't in turn have a different understanding of racial issues, even though I worked in the system that fed right into those problems. I was still too scared to talk about it because I was feeling too much of other people's suffering. Flash forward to where I am now, where I've had to intentionally work on making myself okay for being uncomfortable. And I listened to that song when I watched Billie Holiday versus the United States, that document. It just made so much more sense to me. It didn't even overwhelm me, but I was just like, oh shit. Like, I get the chills just like thinking about it, because it overwhelms me in like a positive way now, because I have like, I can find my understanding of not knowing and not having any understanding of someone else's experience of racism. And I found my own way to make sense of it that brings me power to do something, because I realized that because I felt guilty because I had said racist things in the past because out of just ignorance. I had, my best friend's Black. So I'm like, we've talked about how many mistakes I made in college, and I wasn't aware of them because I never learned, because at that point I had no understanding, no way to understand, as well as was too overwhelmed to understand.
Yeah.
So,
and that's I get that's A, growth, but B, that's also where I feel like we have to be when it comes to having these dialogues. We have to extend, the empathy and the compassion, the understanding, to at least identifying those individuals who are trying to meaningfully understand. Like it goes back to what I said in regard to what you're trying to do with having these discussions. You got to establish who is at the table to seriously and meaningfully have the conversation. I said that because, in part to identify those people who are there to derail the conversation, because there's some people going to show up and they want to be extra racist and they're trying to create this
evoke response.
I
see it every day. We get distracted by our own reaction.
Exactly. So they want to get you obsessed with, this. They want to get you focused on this obsession with the N-word, our cancel culture and stuff like that. So instead of us having a meaningful dialogue that can move forward, we're instead talking about problems that we know it's never going to stop. We can debate the N-word from here until the end of time. They'll be having that debate, 500 years from now. The only way I think the N-word dies is if, the planet explodes when you have some astronauts somewhere on some other colony who have never said it. That's the only time. And even still, it's going to be in the history of the civilization, I'm pretty sure. Like, if you go back and you look at
Fifth Element pops right into my head. Didn't you process all of history? Exactly. History's not going anywhere. It's part of us. It's not a bad
exactly.
It was a bad thing for someone at some point.
Yes.
And we now have to redirect it. But we have to have it when we can't get rid of it.
Yeah. So it's not good. That's what I'm saying is it's not about erasing the past or erasing history. It's about changing how we relate to history moving forward. At some point in the history of the country, like I said, all these Confederate monuments didn't pop up after the Civil War. These Confederate monuments, popped up during the Civil Rights Movement as rallying points for individuals who are pushing back against the cancellation of the antebellum South culture and the romanticization of the same. And so basically you have all these individuals we want to be treated differently. We don't appreciate the culture that you have us in right now, where we can be lynched, where we can't go to the same schools, where we can't have our children go out and be confident they'll come home in one piece, because they may get tossed into a river because they looked at a white woman the wrong way. And so you had that Confederate culture that was pushing back to prevent the cancellation of itself. So yeah, you can't get rid of history. You're not going to change the past. You're not going to change the fact that people did these things. The only thing we can say is back then we honored that culture by doing this. Today, we no longer honor that culture. But we'll admit that there were some people who honored that culture at one time. And so we will take this and put it into a museum where those who honor that culture, where those who saw that, can appreciate it from an objective historical context. But we're not going to place it in the public space where it has to be maintained with monies, and individuals have to see it on a regular basis, who were affected by their actions, who continue to be affected by their actions, because the very existence of that name on that building, the very existence of that shrine in that public square is a testament to the supremacist ideals